Welcome to The Disappearing Mind, a unique podcast helping you find clarity and support along your dementia journey. Now, join National Dementia Trainer and Coach Dawn Platt for an all-new episode.
Welcome to the podcast today. Today I have Tim Guerrette in the studio with me. We're going to be talking about a really now topic called supporting someone with dementia during a hurricane or crisis. And today we have that. It's foremost in our mind. Welcome, Tim.
Well, thank you for having me on. It's great to be here and glad to help out any way I can. And I think it's going to be a great conversation.
Absolutely. So I asked him to sit in the studio with me today, not only because he has professional experience actually working in a retirement area for many, many years, but also personal experience with his father. So Tim, why don't you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, a little bit of the experience I've had professionally. I worked with the Sheriff's Office for 31 years, been through many natural disasters, both on the East Coast, here on the West Coast. And we always take priority when we talk about the elderly, and there's always different needs and different things that we have to do to make sure they're safe, and because they're very vulnerable, right? So that's one of the most things that we look for. And working in that capacity at the Sheriff's Office, I've been involved in the movement of seniors and making sure that they are moved and that type of thing. So that's been really good. And then personally, my dad, he passed away a couple of years ago from heart failure, but he was in a pretty good stage of dementia, diagnosed with Alzheimer's. And I kind of know about how that feels when he didn't really understand what was going on, because we've been through several of these little incidents where the hurricane was coming. Fortunate during his time with me, we didn't have a major hit, but you could feel it in the uncertainty, and not really knowing what was going on was a really big thing for him.
Absolutely. And I just want to say, as we get started, Tim, our hearts and prayers go out to those families that have been impacted across the state of Florida and elsewhere, but especially in our beloved Southwest Florida, which I know is in both of our hearts and has a personal meaning. I want to talk about whether someone with dementia, family member, no matter whether they evacuate or stay put, any crisis or change in their life is going to be impactful for them, because they can't process everything. And a lot of times they pick up on things that are happening in and around them and are actually impacted by the environment. We may see, just because there's a storm coming or just because they've encountered a news broadcast about a storm, even in a different part of where they live or Florida, it can really increase anxiety, fears, cause them to be more disoriented overall. So that's what I want to talk about today, because there are families out there that had to make decisions. They don't know whether they made the right decision or not. And now, even in the aftermath, there's still some probably confusion, probably some guilt, and even fears going on. I want to kind of set up some scenarios, Tim, and then we're going to talk about your experience and maybe some questions you have in regards to those folks who have dementia. But again, I want to honor those who have lost, and our hearts and prayers go out to you. And I know that the help is on the way. We're really seeing a lot of results, even across Collier and Lee County and across the state of Florida. Staying for someone who has a loved one or a friend with dementia could cause them to be put in a dangerous situation. The last thing you would want to do is try and move someone during the storm or late, not knowing where you're going, but also leaving could mean upending them from familiar surroundings and that sense of security that they get being around those that they love, and also their home or surroundings, or maybe somewhere that they have lived for a period of time. Natural disasters in themselves can be particularly terrifying to those of us who don't have dementia.
Right.
But when we have someone with dementia, it can be really overwhelming. I don't know about you, Tim, but even during the storm, having lived here for so many years, moved away and come back, my biggest fears and anxiety was what I didn't know, what I couldn't see, what I couldn't process. And I was never in harm's way, but not knowing that, what the storm was doing once we lost power and that sort of thing, really put me in a precarious situation. And, I felt something I might be able to call confusion. I certainly felt some tenseness or anxiety, and I might have been a little testy during the storm. So I don't know about you. How did you feel not knowing about your friends or different areas of the county that you live in?
Yeah, I think definitely when it's coming your way, so you don't really know, and the news is saying, hey, we might be in this cone. And as it gets closer and closer, and you mentioned it a couple times, did we prepare? Did we make the right decisions? Did we bring our loved ones with us? Do we leave them there? So all these different things are coming. And in your heart, you know that, yeah, probably I'm going to be okay. But all these external elements are coming into it. Did I do the right thing? We all know that we get the warnings and people tell us that we need to evacuate. I think I told maybe 20 people, I said, the safest, the best place if something happens is in my house. I'm probably going to stay there. I knew that I was far enough away from the surge. We found that out to be very, very real. Right. I think over the last 20 years, 30 years since I've been down here, we've never really seen the surge. We've heard the surge.
Yes.
So we've never really seen it. So I think just me, myself, and being very clear-minded, I get anxiety. So I can't even imagine what it'd be like if somebody had dementia or if they had even the elderly in general. That uncertainty, because I know that I feel like, hey, I'm Superman, right? I can swim out of it if I had to. No, I couldn't. But when you get older, those things are huge, and you can't last minute jump in a car and go. So to answer your question, yes, I got a lot of anxiety watching that news, watching that cone come. And, if you were sitting there watching that news with your loved one that has dementia or Alzheimer's or one and the same, that's going to really cause a lot of confusion for that person, I would think.
Absolutely.
And maybe you can tell me if that's even a good idea to be watching the news.
Well, we're going to talk about that in just a minute. We actually are, because that is one of the things that can really create heightened anxiety and confusion for the person. Let's just go back to the storm scenario. So when we think about how we felt during the storm, not knowing, not so much fear, but just really not knowing the unknown, that's kind of how people with dementia are most of the time, because they have an inability to process certain things, their judgment, making determinations, problem solving, those kinds of things. So they're in a kind of storm, but individuals with dementia really function best when they're in familiar environments with people they know, engaging in their usual routines. Routines are so critical and important to people who have dementia. And there's a couple of reasons why. As human beings, when we've lived in a house 20 or 30 years, there are things we do, there are behaviors that we perform we don't really think about. Like, we know where the coffee pot is. We know where the coffee cup is. If our power's out, we know where the bathroom is. All of those things that are just routine behaviors, and we do them without a lot of processing skills. People function best when they stay in a routine. And the reason for that is it really builds expectancy. It builds a sense of trust and security when they kind of have a routine and know what's coming next. I think that that's one of the things that's really important. And we'll get into kind of planning here in a bit, but there's a lot of commotion that goes in and around a storm. And people who have dementia, they lose their five senses at a different rate. So they start feeding off of you. They start feeding off of the TV. They start feeding off of the traffic. Or if you're in a restaurant or a gas station or what Costco's or something like that. So they're feeding off the vibes of the people around them. How we act and how we take control of the situation is going to be directly impactful for that person with dementia. And I personally feel like allowing them to watch too much Weather Channel, listen to too many broadcasts. And I was so glad to have the broadcast. Please don't get me wrong. But for someone with dementia, that over and over and over repeating means they relive it outside of a time span. So they could relive that for days and even weeks. Like, they can't process the beginning from the end.
Right.
So you could see what that would do with you every time you remind them of something or they see it again, they think it's now. So for instance, I have a dear friend who has dementia and was checking in on her quite often. And she would say, where is the storm now? Where is the storm now? Has it gone? Has it gone? And no matter what you would tell her, she
over and over, right?
Over and over again, she would really go back to
Right.
that. So our sense of preparation and rushing and not being prepared is really going to be important, because they're going to feed off of my vibe. They're going to feed off of how calm I am or in control. So, during your time at the sheriff's office, you dealt with retirement area. And I know there was a lot of evacuation, a lot of people told to, but if they have even the slightest amount of dementia, Tim, maybe they couldn't process that. I mean, maybe they couldn't make it happen. Make a plan. Making a plan doesn't happen when you have dementia. So we have a lot of people who have undiagnosed dementia, that may become an issue and they may need someone to help them or support them, or they don't really listen to or apply that evacuation process. So did you run into any of that over your time at the sheriff's office where you had to really go in and add some extra support?
Yeah, absolutely. We have a lot of, as you know, we have a lot of communities in Naples with the elderly. What we would do is we'd actually go through the neighborhoods and try to make contact with these folks that are living in these trailers, because like you said, when I say trailers, homes, trailers, mobile home parks, things that are really high risk, right? Near the water.
Yeah.
We'd actually go through and we'd knock on doors and we'd explain to them the best we could. And if we found somebody that didn't really understand what they were in for, basically we have a whole unit for our senior services at the sheriff's office. So we bring in those people and try to get them to make a decision, call some family members, because the reality is there's people down here that do not have that. They don't have that support. They don't have anybody to jump in a car or go over and, take them or move them. But yeah, we do have that. We try to have them and help them make that judgment call on their own. A lot of times we don't force people out of the homes, and we don't do that because obviously they have their right to stay.
Exactly.
And maybe we can't make an assessment of what their mental condition is at the time. But yeah, we do have that support there for them. Again, trying to get to all those residents is going to be a problem. And I think on Fort Myers Beach, I believe you're going to find a lot of those folks that perished in that storm probably were people just like that. They either didn't want to leave, maybe they were elderly, didn't know how to get out. And once it was too late to go, it was nothing they could do.
Well, you said it, Tim. We've heard for years about the surge, and we never really experienced it. So maybe there are elderly that live there a long time, and because they hadn't experienced it, probably wasn't a time that they could process the danger as well. That could be a really sad scenario. But when somebody who has dementia feels rushed or pushed, oftentimes they just shut down. I mean, that's their response to feeling pushed or rushed. It really takes a lot of support for them. They also are likely to respond in various ways, like they don't have that barometer. So when somebody's feeling pushed, or they'll get extra anxious, they could have anger, lashing out, do things they wouldn't normally do because they can't process the situation. And frankly, anger is a little bit easier to bring out. We see that in a lot of scenarios. People had asked me about shelters and all. And personally, I know we have some great shelters in Southwest Florida and really across the nation. But dementia is a whole different ballgame. So I generally advise my families to find an alternative place that they could go with friends or family, or even in a smaller place where there could be less people, less strangers, less talking and commotion going on, because simply shelters are not really the best place for people who have moderate dementia, just because of the anxiety that they might experience. But in the worst case scenario, if you know that's going to happen, and you live in a hurricane zone, you really need to start talking to your doctor early and planning for that. I mean, anxiety is real. It's real for everyday people who have panic attacks. It can be really real. And there are things that the doctor can give you in that case scenario to make it easier and to keep that person and others around them safe. I think that that's really important. I know we've talked about evacuating or not, but I want to share some of the situations that I've run across and that I've talked with families just in the last couple of days. One of the things that happens not only in a shelter or a hotel or other unfamiliar surroundings is people won't sleep. So people who have dementia, they may get anxious or have fears, but they also could have insomnia, and they're replaying this in their mind. So when you have someone who has dementia on top of not sleeping, like any other human being compounded, you could have a lot of scenarios going on, and they come right back down and want to know why the power's off. Tim, you should fix that? Why aren't you fixing that? Why is the light not on in the refrigerator? You need to take care of that. And then you get them settled down, you get them distracted, they come right back again. It's the same scenario. Tim, why is the lights not on? Why is the refrigerator not on? I think that that's important. I had a family actually who had a bag packed and kind of had a plan, but plans change as the cone of the storm changed and as the planning changes. And they ended up going to a hotel. They could stay at that hotel a couple of days and then they had to relocate to a new hotel. And what that did really was not only put them in the traffic, put them in the whole parking lot evacuation situation, which is nerve-wracking. I was in that. It was nerve-wracking for me, but it was very nerve-wracking for the spouse who was advising the wife how to drive, right? You know how that happens.
Yeah. No, I don't know anything about that.
Right. But here's the thing. They had to go to a new place, new surrounding, and then they had to move again. So what happened is in the second scenario, the gentleman had a meltdown because it was too much to process. I think that planning and understanding what to do, trying to keep things really simple and validating them. The less they know is better. It's a great time to come up with the little white lie. It's the great time to make up a story. And here's the great thing, Tim, about making up a story. Because they have dementia, you can remake that story over and over. And it has the same comfort level that it had the first time. And I think that's really important. Another scenario I want to talk about, Tim, is a family whose mother was a little unstable. She actually was going in to evaluate medications and all. The doctor already had her in a hospital setting. Here comes the storm. We're not in the cone, but the storm gets more intense and the family happens to be in an evacuation area. They had to make a decision. And that's really hard. It's guilt. Do I take mom or do I trust my facility? Do I trust the professionals? And I think the best case scenario, Tim, is that trust comes in. You have to do what you have to do. And I was talking with the daughter about the guilt. Mom is angry. She's frustrated. How could you leave me? But here's the thing. You don't know what you're going to encounter on the road to evacuate. There are lots of things that could actually happen.
Sure.
You could be stalled. You could be in an accident. You could be on a parking lot, that kind of thing. There are families out there that have that guilt. And then there are families that have to trust that you're doing the right thing. I want to revert this question kind of back to you. And I know you didn't go through. The storm gets more intense and the family happens to be in an evacuation area. That you did put your dad in social situations and everyday life. You socialized him. You took him out. How did you manage that with the people around him and around you? Did you tell them what? Your dad was functioning with full-blown dementia, and I think he did very well. What was that like?
Yeah, I think the big thing is the people we went, for the most part, kind of knew my dad's situation, so that made things a little bit easier. And if they didn't really know, you'd kind of have a quick conversation, say, hey, he's getting a little bit older, he forgets things. As soon as you have that conversation with people around you, they actually almost overdo it. Because they're like, oh, yeah, he's so cute. He's just a good guy, and talking about my dad, they really loved him because his personality was great. But you kind of had that little conversation where they kind of knew that he was not fully mentally aware of what was going on. But that was kind of what we did. But I think we just kind of treated dad as kind of like, hey, we're here, we're having fun. He knew me to the last day. So that was a good thing. I mean, he knew, who I was. He just would get foggy and he wouldn't know, and he would question why we were doing what we were doing, but he always had fun doing it, which I was fortunate. But he did have roller coaster ride with him. He'd get grumpy over. I remember one day we went to, and this is kind of a little bit off base, but we went to a golf cart ride and he really wanted to go to Checkers and get the French fries and the hamburger. And I said, Dad, if we go home and get the hot dog and some other stuff, would that be all right? Well, he just totally melted down on that. I think we talked about it on the story, but he melted down because I didn't realize how much he was focused on getting his French fries and his Checkers and not the hot dog. But just little things that you kind of have to remain consistent with, I think, is big, and explain to them why we're doing what we're doing the best you can.
Yes.
Because it's not always easy because they don't understand sometimes. And I think with the storm and getting out and doing things with him, I'd always try to explain why we're here. And I would have to do it multiple times. Who is that person again? Or why are they coming up to me? And a lot of times I've had pretty good conversations with him. I go, what does it feel like, Dad? What does it feel like not to remember? And he goes, I just don't understand. It just doesn't click together with me. So I guess to answer your question is, you kind of prep people who are around you and they kind of know a little bit about his circumstance, and they really kind of lean in and kind of help out and understand. That's kind of my experiences. Yeah. You're not always fortunate to have that, because if he's upset at the waitress because there's customs for elderly, and a lot of those customs are out the window nowadays. People will take your plate
and not ask
and not ask. And they'll take, I mean, his big thing was his drink. We would sit there literally for an hour and a half sometimes to finish his drink, because that was his drink. And I'd be like, Dad, drink that, drink it up. I go, and he just was so frugal on everything. Like that drink had to be finished before he would leave.
Absolutely.
And coffee and all that stuff. And he'd just kind of look at people sometimes and be like, why are you taking my stuff? And I'd kind of explain to him, and then they figured it out real quick.
Absolutely. How about eye contact? Like, eye contact is real important to them. It means respect. That's kind of gone out the window today too. People don't understand the importance of that. Tim, I don't get the opportunity really to talk with sons much. It's mostly daughters or daughter-in-law. Yeah. So I happen to think that maybe your creativity and your spontaneity was probably pretty helpful with your dad. And I think that people in a storm or a situation like we are right now could really use that. I know you explained, but there must have been times that you just made up a story and gave up on explaining.
Oh, yes.
It's just easier.
Yes.
Right. And it's easier on them, because when you explain to people, they get that puzzled, kind of like you're looking at me now, that I look and they're trying to process. That makes it hard for them. You just say it like it is. You just say, hey, we're okay. We're doing good. And in an hour, we're going to have a burger and fries. Kind of just settle it.
Yeah. And I look back, we did have to leave for a little bit at the house, because I remember there was fires, I believe, coming around, and it wasn't a storm, but it was fire. So we went to the Ritz. I have a friend that used to work at the Ritz, and I go, we're going on vacation this weekend. So we went to the Ritz, because it was more about the smoke and all the stuff coming through. And we kind of left for the weekend, and I kind of made up a little thing like, hey, we're getting away from the house, because I didn't want him to be worried about the house burning down and things like that. So I do remember a scenario like that. And we kind of went with it like, hey, we're on vacation for a couple of days, it's good. And yeah, I think he thought we were in another state.
There you go. So
I didn't lie to him. I said, hey, we're going for vacation. But I think
they're white lies. Those are not real lies, Tim. They're just to make them comfortable.
Thank you. Make me feel better about that.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, you set me up for this story I want to talk about when it comes to the news, a crisis, or January 6th, or whatever it might be, national disaster. Several years ago, actually, the fires in California, I was in a senior living community and the news was on, and they were talking about the fires in California. And one of the residents who had dementia was in the neighborhood. And of course, they were all watching it. And all of a sudden, he had a major outburst. And the reason he had an outburst is his daughter had lived, we couldn't even confirm it, in California, perhaps, or maybe not, in the areas where the fires were. So he was live and the daughter was burning. And this was so very vivid and real to him. And I think that that's the scenario. We give them too much information, and we really can't do that, because it can create, listen, you're already in crisis. Nothing's normal. You don't want to compound it,
sensationalize it, or
absolutely, hyper because it's going to make it worse. There's this law, at least in the buildings that I oversee and I advise, there is no news in a memory care setting, especially disasters. There's none of that. And the reason is we want to spare them from that thought process, because that was very devastating for him. And I kept reliving it. Let's move on to a little bit about suspicion and paranoia, and may go back to another situation. Whether you've evacuated and you've gone to a shelter, or you're in a hotel, or maybe you've just gone to a friend's house, that environment can be very hard for them to process. You might see some heightened suspicion or paranoia, especially if you're storing food. We had water here and extra supplies and pillows and all of that. And maybe we're rationing food or water. has seen suspicion around food or around people or who is that person over there, that can really be heightened. So the paranoia, the suspicion, because they really can't figure out where we are, what state we are, what the situation is, it can really heighten those kinds of behaviors. So we want to really minimize that to the best of our ability. I have another scenario where this actually happened in Estero Bay. Friends live on Estero Bay and the cars floated away. I mean, that just really happened. This was mentioned to a dear friend who happens to know the person. When she kept repeating it, she thought that their house was destroyed and maybe they had died. So she sensationalized the scenario. She connected it with other things, maybe other tragedies, that kind of thing. That can happen real often because when people have dementia, they connect new memories to old.
Right. So there's no timeline.
No
right?
timeline. So they could connect it to the war. They could connect it to something tragic in their life or the loss of a loved one or a child, something like that. So we need to be really cautious and careful about that. They can start blaming. Let's say that the home had something going on, or maybe you came back and it was somewhat destroyed. They can blame or place blame. And the reason is they can't process what really happened. So the best thing for them to do is to project blame and do that. They're not able to gauge that. So we see that kind of thing can really happen when you're in that situation. So for families, I think I want to get a little bit into what do you do and how do you plan? We all know the whole planning scenario. It's a little bit different if you have a loved one with dementia. You got to plan way ahead. I would say you always have a bag packed for someone with dementia. And you always kind of have some sort of plan of what you would do if this or that happened, especially if you're in a hurricane or evacuation area. And then I would have a plan A, B, and C of where I might go. And I would have some support ready for that. I think that one of the first things is I would look at my loved one and I would begin talking to the doctor about it, because we know the anxiety that can come with chaos happening. Talk to your doctor and explain. I live in an evacuation area. My loved one, my spouse gets very anxious. They're already on something. And maybe you need to have something a little extra, the just in case. We call it PRM because we know you get your prescriptions for 30 days when a storm is coming. Well, if you have dementia, you get it for 30 days, but maybe you get a little extra that you wouldn't normally need to use, but you've now been put into a situation that's a little bit different. Those of us who don't have dementia, we medicate in different ways, but that could happen and it could be very helpful if necessary. We want to really watch the whole process. We don't want to include them in our grocery store to get supplies. We don't want to be going out to a lot of restaurants and things where people are in line or waiting and all that. We don't want to be waiting in line at gas stations with our loved one there. Or we talked about the parking lot traffic. Living through a massive hurricane can be hard enough on us. I think having that plan is going to be really vital. And then I talked about on another podcast, something I think that people can relate to. Some of us are strong and some of us aren't as strong. Some of us need reassurance and some of us are just leaders. I think that you can never reassure enough when someone has dementia and you're going through a crisis. I don't think you can validate enough throughout the day. Even if you said it 2 hours ago, it's okay. Everything is good. I'm here with you. We're good.
We're a team.
We're a team.
We're going to do this together.
There you go. There you go. I don't think you can do that enough, whether you're a police officer.
Right.
And believe me, for some reason, when people have dementia, they respond to police officers.
Yeah, it's what they know and ingrained, I think.
And they feel secure, right?
Yeah, right.
In that kind of setting. I think that that's a good scenario. But let's talk about preparing ahead again. One of the things I think, other than validating, is to have a plan to maintain some sort of routine. There's something that we call engagement and redirection. Have a box or a bag or books of activities that they can engage in, whether it's their favorite sports magazine or whether it's picture books or puzzles, whatever the case might be. It might even be, I don't know, folding t-shirts, something like that, that really could refocus, have something for them to do throughout the day. If you're not going to have power, whether you stayed at home or whether you did it, I don't know, maybe it's drying dishes, maybe it's putting away something, but having an activity that's an engagement and energy exertion opportunity is going to be key. Because the last thing you want them to do is be sitting around, twiddling their thumbs, focusing on stuff. It can be hard to exert energy when you're sheltered, but exerting energy is going to help them relax. It's going to help them sleep better. Again, avoiding the news reports, even talking on the phone. Okay, so if you're talking on the phone to a relative, and we all know they're all going to call and check on you.
What's going on? Everything good?
Yeah, and you're repeating stuff over and over. You're just reinforcing that with that person who has dementia. We need to practice patience. I know raising my children, I would have to be a little lenient now and then. And we have to practice patience with our loved one, whether it's our spouse or mother or father or sister who has dementia. And that can be hard, but it's something that we have to remember because they're going to feed off of us and they're going to ask us over and over about the situation. Did you have to do that much with your dad?
He was more curious about things. He didn't have that repeating thing, just constantly repeating, after you just said something. He was pretty good about that. He would have that confusion mostly. He would have the confusion, but he wouldn't do the repeating too much. And I think the big thing with him was he would get confused as to what time of day it was, why people aren't calling, who called. I think you brought up a good point with his suspicion. He was very nervous. Like, he really didn't know how to judge how much food he was eating. So he would actually eat himself where he didn't feel good. And then he thought the food was, something was wrong with the food. Yeah. You're like, hey, Dad, you can't be eating. Like, he'd bite an onion. He used to be able to, when he was a kid, he'd be able to bite an onion. He'd want to show everybody that was cool and he could eat onion. Well, that's why your stomach is feeling I said, you can't be doing that stuff. You try to bring those things up with him. And I think it's probably with everybody, and just, you kind of go along with it to a certain extent, and you kind of distract them and then take the onion and put it away and then say, hey, that was a pretty good thing. And where's my onion? Well, we put it back in the refrigerator or something. Heaven forbid we threw it away. Right. Because he'd go over to the garbage and look, because the time that he grew up, he still remembers that every little thing could be used for something. And then I'd wrap it up, put it in the refrigerator, and the next day I'd toss it, or just little things like that. And, of course, he'd ask for it the next day, maybe. I think to answer your question is, did he have that repeating behavior? No, not too much. I think, like you said, the patience is, and I've talked to so many people since, the patience of that repeating just gets really difficult. I used to get worried because I would go in the bathroom and the faucets would all be on, the lights would all be on, and I'd come back and I'd just start laughing. I go, when I was a little kid, Dad, you used to like get on me for the lights. I said, and he, the lights are off, and he would laugh with me. I try to make it a joke because no matter how many times I tell him, it's still going to happen. Little things like that are still going to happen. It's going to happen. I just had to make sure that nothing was in the sink, flood the whole house. Little things like that. But
absolutely.
But I look back and I think, like you said, patience is the biggest thing. You'd like to think you can handle it, but there are times where you yourself are going through so much and you break, and you're like, I need someone to tap me out. And I think over the years, as I get older, I have a lot more patience than I used to. So I think the timing was right.
So did you belong to a support group, or what kind of support, Megan?
No, I didn't really. I didn't. I tried to get involved, and I just wasn't one of those guys that, I shouldn't use the word, didn't think I needed it. But everything was going so fast that I kind of dealt with it. I talked to a lot of people. A lot of people. We have a really, at the sheriff's office when I worked there, we had just a great senior services, Angela Larson. She's wonderful, and they would give me like little tidbits of what to do and what to expect. And my dad, he had definitely had some mental issues, but he never really lost the memory of me, which that was something I never really wanted to see.
What a blessing that is.
Yeah, and he ended up passing away with heart attack or whatever. So that's a blessing. So he always remembered me. He got confused. He had a lot of dreams, a lot of nightmares, a lot of things like that. And he'd wake me up in the middle of the night and he'd be like, you hear this? What's going on in my room? I'm like, Dad. He goes, you had a big party here last night. I go, no, I wished I did, Dad, but I did not have a big party. He checked the garbage cans because he heard it. I mean, and I wasn't going to I'd be like, Dad, we didn't, but those are just some things that a little bit of symptoms and signs that he was going through some rough times, but I don't think he really knew it. So I don't think it was.
I think you made a real difference. So, and I think that sons need to hear this, and it's not unusual that sons don't go to support groups. I think you supported very well, and you had some people you could talk to.
Yeah.
Right?
I think I had the basic tools. You always got to hear from other people because you want to know how to handle these things. But I think I had some pretty good people around me, and I was able to ask, and I actually enjoyed it. I look back, and when I say I enjoyed it, we had just so many funny laughs because my mother and my father, they were married for 50, 60, almost 60 years. And she just had a real hard time with taking care of them. It would be like oil and vinegar, right?
Yeah.
They'd be like, at each other. And then when he came with me, he kind of the roles changed, and I became the parent and he became the son. And I never let him know that because I was always be like, Dad, I never confused that. He's always my dad, but
right.
he would be like, why are you telling me this? And I'm like, well, I'm just making sure you're safe. That's all. I care about you.
There you go.
Those were always tough. But if it would not have been in this situation, I wouldn't have, because we've lived, went in the military and I moved to Florida. They lived down here for about 5 years.
Right.
And he's back in Maine. And if I didn't have this chance, I wouldn't have had 2.5 or 2 really solid good years with him before he passed.
Absolutely.
So it was a blessing. I mean,
that is a blessing. Well, just a few last thoughts that I want to throw out there to the audience. I would say to any family, caregiver, or even a friend, lower your expectations. We set some pretty high standards of ourselves, and maybe a spouse of 40, 50 years, that's really hard to do, but lower your expectations. Don't expect as much from them or yourself. We don't have to do all the stuff we do. We just have to live the moment, the day, the hour. So lower them. The other thing is take them out of the equation. Okay. They're not part of the problem solving equation. They're not going to be, take them out. Make the plans, make the decisions. I know that's hard to do, especially for a son with a dad. Like you want him to make some of his own decisions until you're convinced he can't make good ones. Take them out of the equation. Make it easier on them and on yourself by making decisions that are going to be best for you as well as for your loved one and the family, and keep them safe. That's number one, keep them safe. But we have to really take them out of the equation. When we put them in the equation and we wait for that response that we've had for all our life, it's just going to be very disappointing because they can't bring it anymore. And I think when you learn to live with that, I've heard everything from how they cut their hair to no longer going certain places they used to go because it was just too difficult. And it's okay. It's really okay to do that. And then return to normal routines as quickly as possible. Try and return to normal routines, even if life isn't normal. Try and get their routines back to normal. Find a place to take your fears and your anxieties, and really, even if you're in the storm, you have a lot of stuff that has to happen, ask for some help. Try and not involve them in the cleanup or what all needs to be done. Try and get some support and help. There's support out there, no matter where you are. And in Florida, there's support groups. There's the Alzheimer's Association. There's a foundation right here in Naples, Fort Myers, and across wherever you live. And see if you can get some respite or support. I think that we've done very well. And I just wanted to have this discussion today. So for those of you who are out there that have a friend or a loved one who has dementia, I just want to say to you, you're not alone. There are other people like you going through what you're going through. It feels very personal, but people live it every day, and they've gone through some pretty bizarre situations. It's nothing to be ashamed of. Dementia takes over our loved ones, and they're not who they used to be, but it is a disease. It's not the person. So if this podcast has helped you today, I hope you will listen in the future, and we're here to support you and your loved ones. Have a wonderful day.
Thank you for joining us for the Disappearing Mind podcast. We hope it's helped you find clarity and support along your journey. Be sure to subscribe to never miss an episode, visit our website to suggest future topics, and share the podcast with friends and family.